So, hi everyone, welcome this afternoon to our Greater Boston Climate Action Plan workshop on agriculture and natural lands. My name is Sasha Scheideroff, and I am a principal planner on the clean energy team at MAPC. Before we jump in, I have a few Zoom housekeeping pieces. If you could please keep yourself on mute when you're not talking, that helps with background noise. Use the chat feature to ask questions. We will have a brief Q&A after some of the presentations, and then a longer breakout room discussions after as well. And if you haven't already, please do rename yourself in the Zoom with at least your name and your organization or community. So in today's virtual workshop, our goal is to introduce you all as key stakeholders to the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan and our new sector around agriculture and natural lands. And within this, also to hear from you all what priorities you have and what you're working on and interests are in agriculture and natural lands, and how we can use this sector to reduce greenhouse gases across the region and incorporate it into our Greater Boston Climate Action Plan. So right now we're doing our welcome. We'll also have some breakout time for introductions. We'll do an overview of the Greater Boston CAP, an introduction to the sector, and then we'll spend about 30 minutes or so in breakout group discussions, smaller group facilitated conversations, and then close out and talk about next steps. So because we have good number of folks on the call today, we wanted a chance for people to introduce themselves to each other in small rooms of 2 to 3 people. So in a minute, you're going to get a pop-up for a breakout room where we would just like you to introduce yourself to the others with your name, your organization or community, and why you are attending this session today. And we will do that for about 5 minutes as we get started. Colleague Ali Shepard, who is a clean energy and climate planner at MAPC, to talk more about the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan.
Thanks, Sasha. Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Shepard, and as Sasha said, I'm on the clean energy team at MAPC and have been working on the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan with this awesome team. And so just to give you a quick overview of what this plan is, it's really a regional roadmap to rapidly decrease our greenhouse gas emissions, slow the impacts of climate change, and realize the near-term community benefits and co-benefits of reducing emissions. I'm sure many of you on this call are well aware of all of the benefits of reducing pollution and carbon emissions, but they include improving air quality and public health, increasing local clean energy jobs, reducing energy costs, improving public transportation, walkability, and many other things. I just want to note that this plan is funded by the US EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, or CPRG, and we're also thankful to the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources and the Barr Foundation for supporting this work. So the region that this plan covers aligns with what is called the Metropolitan Statistical Area, or MSA. And this is something that's defined by the federal government and is a region that has shared social, cultural, and economic ties with the dense population center. Of course, for the Boston MSA, that's Boston. And our region has 167 cities and towns. That includes parts of eastern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire. And the region includes 4.7 million residents. And also within the region, we have 7 regional planning agencies or regional planning commissions, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And then just finally, as a note, planning for climate action at the regional level really allows us to work together to solve these shared challenges and improve the region, rather than doing this work 167 times in every individual community. And so, as I mentioned, the 7 RPAs or RPCs that are in the region are leading the development of the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan. So as you can see, all 7 are listed here, and it includes 3 in New Hampshire and 4 in Massachusetts, including us, MAPC, who are presenting today. And so we are actually currently in the second phase of this planning effort. And in the first phase, which ended in March of this year, we developed a priority climate action plan for the region. And this plan included 11 priority greenhouse gas reduction measures to implement in the near term by 2030 across 4 sectors, including buildings, transportation, electricity generation, and waste. And we also completed an inventory of the region's greenhouse gas emissions for the year 2017. So the full plan is available on our website, and we'll share all the links that we showed today with you in the follow-up. And so just looking towards the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan, the full plan we're working on now and talking about today. So we've been working on this since the completion of the priority plan in March, and we will complete the full plan by December of 2025. And so we have the next 13 or 14 months to continue working on this plan. And so the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan will expand upon that priority plan to include 20 to 35 measures across now 6 sectors, including buildings, energy generation, transportation and mobility, waste and materials management, agriculture and natural lands, and industry and manufacturing. And the plan will also include an updated greenhouse gas emissions inventory for 2022, greenhouse gas reduction targets for 2030 and 2050, and a workforce planning and benefits analysis for the region. And as I mentioned in our priority plan, we conducted an inventory of the greenhouse gas emissions across the region for the year 2017. We just wanted to show what that looks like here. So as you can see, the energy and electricity used in buildings is the largest source of emissions, followed by transportation, of which most is from passenger vehicles. And then waste is just under 5% of the region's emissions. And this 2017 inventory also included emissions from commercial fertilizer, which you see under the agriculture bar, and that contributes about 0.1% of the region's emissions. And it also includes negative emissions or sequestered emissions from forests, which you can see in that gray bar on the far right. And we're currently working on that 2022 emissions inventory that I mentioned. And so we're exploring other data sources and methodologies to capture some more of the emission sources and sinks from the agriculture and natural land sector. And I will now turn it back to Sasha to dive a little bit deeper into what we're going to discuss today.
Great, thank you, Allie. So as Allie mentioned, the agriculture natural lands is a new sector for this phase of the plan and includes both emission sources as well as emission sinks. And so when we think about agriculture and natural lands, the primary sources of greenhouse gas emissions come from farming and agriculture, particularly nitrous oxide from crops and growing sort of the growth of crops, and then also from livestock, including methane from things like cows and goats and sheep. Also includes emissions from machinery and equipment that are used in farming and agriculture, and then also the burning of forests and then deforestation, which may be used for agriculture purposes, and that releases carbon from the soils. On the flip side, when we look at agriculture and natural lands, there's also opportunities for carbon sequestration and what we call our greenhouse gas sinks. And so typically we look at land conservation and preservation, as well as things like constructed wetlands that can help both preserve existing wetlands as well as developing new wetlands, and sort of reclaiming wetlands can be a huge opportunity for greenhouse gas sinks. Also within agriculture, you have a lot more regenerative soil techniques that can help reduce emissions from nitrous oxide, whether that is planting cover crops or perennials, or doing no-till or low-till practices. And then the other piece that Allie mentioned was also around tree canopy and forests. So we do have some tools at our at our disposal for calculating the greenhouse gas carbon sink for tree canopy. So both preserving existing trees as well as increasing tree canopy in urban trees and forests. And then also responsible forestry and harvested wood can also act as a sink if that wood is then not burned or processed. Also within this sector, we wanted to bring up the concepts of ecosystem services. And basically ecosystem services are goods and services that benefit humans. And so that can include things like on the provision side, the raw materials and food and water. On the regulation side, really talks about systems, so water systems, air, pollination, supporting categories, so nutrient cycles and soil formation that then supports the rest of the ecosystem services. And then last but not least, sort of cultural values around whether it's recreation, in ecotourism, or spiritual and cultural needs. And so when we think about agriculture and natural lands, we also want to think about it through this lens of ecosystem services and how we're working with and using nature and natural systems to benefit humans. The other piece of ecosystem services and within this sector are some of the co-benefits that we see. So while this plan is not a climate resilience plan and primarily focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, there are also overlapping co-benefits with resilience, particularly when we think about land use and natural lands, whether it is the tree canopies that are helping to reduce urban heat islands or wetlands that are both carbon sinks as well as help with coastal flooding. We can really see those sort of co-benefits and think about how our natural systems are not necessarily providing one service, but multiple services at a time. In terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions within these sectors, we define it as strategies, programs, policies, and projects that groups of municipalities or regional entities can implement to reduce emissions and advance our equity priorities. So just a few example measures in this sector and what we've seen from some of the local climate action plans that we've reviewed across the region. This includes things like increasing tree canopies and preserving existing trees through watering and maintenance. Like this example on the right is from the Natick, Massachusetts High School, where they planted 700 trees in their tiny forest. This was both for carbon GHG benefits as well as to help improve cooling and shade canopy. Another measure could be things like working with farmers to reduce usage of nitrogen and the fertilizers and explore regenerative soil practices. So the measures within this sector really run a wide, sort of a wide variety. We have a couple other community spotlights of projects that have come out in the last few years that really also are at the intersection of both mitigation and resilience. So one is the Miyawaki Forest in North Cambridge at the Danahy Park site, which is built on a former landfill. And for those of you that don't know, a Miyawaki forest is an ultra dense biodiverse pocket forest that can also be used for education purposes. And this is the first example of a Miyawaki forest in the Northeast United States. And they did this in part to help reduce local heat islands and to help increase biodiversity. Another community spotlight example comes from New Hampshire with the New American Sustainable Agriculture Project, which is a training program to work with refugee and immigrant to build sustainable farm enterprises. And so thinking about combining sustainable farming practices and adapting skills and ambition into the New Hampshire landscape and markets. So these two just kind of give a snapshot of what the sector can include and some of the success stories that we're seeing across the region. And now I'm going to just pause to see if there's any questions before we move into our guest speaker. So feel free to either raise your hand, or if you have a question about the Greater Boston Climate Action Plan or the sector in general, feel free to put them in the chat. Yes, William.
Hi, it's actually Buzz Constable. And I'm curious, given MAPC's and the other regional planning agencies' long work on real planning, I'm surprised that we haven't seen yet anything about real development. So I appreciate the idea that planting trees is good, but I think the Harvard Forest has shown that it takes at least a dozen years before there's any net sequestration of carbon compared to what it takes to prepare and plant the trees. I wonder if you are looking at tree protection bylaws, which some towns in the metropolitan area are doing, or I think ultimately including in your plan the idea of more dense housing development, because housing and solar panels, but housing primarily cuts down more trees than anything else in our region. And I wonder if those are included in what you're looking at for your action plan. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We'll also have time for you to share your thoughts in the breakout discussion around priorities within this sector. So things like local bylaws and tree protection ordinances is definitely something that could fit into that. We do also have an existing resilient land use toolkit on our website that highlights different local bylaws and policies that municipalities can take, including around tree protection. We also need to balance the need for additional housing and affordable housing with climate. So things like transit-oriented housing, as you mentioned, smaller homes, transit-oriented homes can all be part of a climate solution. So that certainly also factors into not just the land use choices, but also into the other sectors like transportation and buildings, and thinking about energy efficiency in those sectors. I think during today's call, we'll be focusing a lot on agriculture and natural lands, but there's also opportunity to provide feedback in the other sectors as well. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, Pamela asks, is there any funding to support farms that are working towards regenerative agriculture? I believe there is. I don't have any of the links right off the top of my head, but that's something that we can follow up with. I know that there is federal funding through the USDA. I'm not sure about from Massachusetts or New Hampshire state agencies. So I'm going to move us into our, yes, can share those resources as follow-up. So I'm going to move us into our next section. We wanted to continue to share some local stories and spotlight some successes from around the region. So today we're joined by Andrea Becerra from the town of Acton, who is the town's first sustainability director and was appointed in 2021 as part of that new role and new department within the town. Previously, Andrea worked at the Natural Resources Defense Council on climate and energy and water policies across the Americas, and she holds a master's degree from the Fletcher School of Tufts with a Water Systems Science and Society certificate. So we are pleased to have Andrea here today to talk with us about some of the work they've been doing in Acton.
Thank you, Sasha, for that introduction. Yeah, so I figured I would dive through this by looking at our climate action plan and then looking at some of the things we've implemented from there. So next. So when we published our climate action plan in 2022, we published 2 goals under nature-based solutions. One is Acton's natural resources are protected, managed, connected, and restored to increase carbon sequestration, equity, resilience, and biodiversity. And then the other one is local land use policy encourages affordable, diverse, transit-oriented, and net zero housing while also enhancing nature-based solutions. Next. The tricky thing with nature-based solutions is that it's hard to measure. We didn't capture carbon sequestration or carbon storage in our greenhouse gas inventory. So we're not officially tracking it, but we're started to find ways of tracking it. So we're using currently the iTree tool. My understanding is MAPC is gonna develop, or maybe they've already developed the tool to incorporate tree coverage and green spaces as part of greenhouse gas inventories. So I'm excited for that tool to be available. But for now, we are using iTree. The good news is that the amount of tree coverage has increased in Acton in the last 3 years. So you see here in 2021, we had 9,050 metric tons of carbon sequestered annually in trees, and then in 2024, 11,870 metric tons. The other great news is our overall emissions have gone down by 19% between 2017 and 2022. So that's our transportation, our buildings, and our solid waste, which we do measure a lot more precisely, I would say. But it's great that we have the iTree tool as some sort of metric. And the tricky thing is if you really aren't tracking it, it's hard to prioritize it. So we've started to do that. Next, please. So in our climate action plan, we've identified 4 nature-based solutions. I'm not going to focus on the agriculture components because we just haven't done as much work around that in implementation. But I will just mention what our actual actions are around agriculture, and then dive into some of the other projects. So actions to support sustainable agriculture in our climate action plan include provide resources, including financial assistance to support community-supported agriculture memberships for low-income residents. Number 2, explore opportunities to encourage agrophotovoltaics, which is not something we typically think about when it comes to how agriculture can serve a positive role when it comes to reducing emissions in a community. And then number 3, partner with organizations supporting sustainable agriculture. So for this particular presentation, as I mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on green space initiatives and natural lands. So next, please. So this is a really exciting one. One of our actions in our climate action plan calls for ensuring development is paired with nature-based solution. And we're working with planning right now for the Habitat for All initiative. And so we're soliciting input from the community on how to improve the by right zoning method so that we're protecting natural lands, but also promoting affordable housing. So today, Acton's only by right method of housing development is the standard subdivision in which a road is created to carve out large lots into smaller lots with no open space preserved. And this puts a strain on the natural land, and it also creates a lot of disparate housing as well. which is not great for wildlife and creates a lot of just cut grass, which is also not great for carbon sequestration. So Habitat for All is a planning effort to look at how zoning could help address both of these issues through a by right method for housing development that creates deed restricted affordable housing while also protecting natural resources. So that's an ongoing effort. Next. Another action we have in our climate action plan is to prioritize increasing equitable access to green spaces. We're just starting this work right now. We have a draft map that we put together with recreation, and we're just looking at our green spaces and our recreation facilities and seeing what the buffer is, the mile, half mile, quarter mile buffer for identifying access, resource access, the places where there's a lack of access to these spaces. And then we've also included in the map the environmental justice population as well, which is on the right here, but actually it's in the north in Acton. We've just shifted the map. This is just an initial step to start seeing how we can prioritize either the implementation of new spaces or ways to improve that access and make it easier for people to get to those recreation and green spaces. And again, very much connected to carbon sequestration. If we're looking to expand opportunities for carbon sequestration, how can we also do that in concert with promoting environmental justice? Next, please. This is a little bit less focused on natural lands specifically as the tool for carbon sequestration, but definitely connected to emissions overall. So one of our other actions in the climate action plan is to electrify municipal landscaping equipment. This is also something that I think is becoming a hot topic for a lot of communities because there's been a lot of bylaws being passed to ban gas-powered leaf blowers, and that work is happening in communities near Acton. So we're currently have a policy in place to electrify all lawnmowers within our municipal operations, and we've so far acquired 2 electric lawnmowers. We don't have an overall ban in place, but we are doing the work to try to electrify the lawnmowers in our municipal operations. Next. And this is a really exciting project that we received funding from MAPC's Accelerating Climate Resilience Grant to do. So the Red House is a property that's located right next to the library and right next to Town Hall. It's a 1 acre land of property, and looks like private property. It looks just like a house, but it's not. It's public. And so we received funding to transform the space into a more inviting space for the community, and then also turn it into a sort of pocket park, but also like a walking museum of sorts, or educational center where people will be able to walk through this space and see various information panels that tell them about tools and ways to make your own space at home more climate resilient. And so there'll be lots of resources, information on how to install a rain barrel, how to grow a healthy meadow. 1 acre of healthy meadow can sequester as much carbon as 6 acres of forest. So they are a powerhouse when it comes to carbon sequestration, but they do need to be managed, and there is some skill required to install these meadows in other lands. So our hope is to make this a space where people can learn how to plant a meadow in their backyard and how to make their spaces beneficial when it comes to climate action. And we're working, this is a multi-departmental effort Department of Public Works is involved. Conservation is heavily involved. In fact, they've led a lot of the volunteer efforts. We've had, I want to say, over 30 volunteers involved this summer and fall in planting, removing invasives. And we're also going to be doing other cool things when it comes to carbon sequestration, like harvesting wood. You know, Sasha, you mentioned wood harvesting as an option as well for reducing carbon emissions in natural lands. There's a nearby development that's removing a lot of trees, and we're using that harvested wood, working with Minuteman Tech School students to build benches using the wood from those trees that have been cut down. So that's a really fun, neat thing we're doing as well. And again, there's going to be information panels throughout this property identifying all the various components of, you know, how does this benefit the climate, how does this enhance biodiversity, and yeah, a very fun project. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. I think we have just maybe like 2 minutes if there's any immediate questions before we go into our breakout room activity. So folks have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, great. There's a question from Chad from Tufts University. How did you go about inventorying all your trees for the iTree data you presented?
Yeah, so it's actually it's a tool that does it for you. We don't like physically go to, you know, do any sort of assessment of the trees. It's used, they use mapping software, and it's a statistical estimate like of randomly selected points method. That's like the actual method they use. But it's not actually super time intensive. So it's a really neat tool. And I recommend people check it out.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's the same methodology that we used in the regional inventory. But as Ali mentioned, we're also looking into other potential methodologies to help kind of bolster the greenhouse gas inventory and how we're calculating those emission sinks. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of the great work that you're doing in Acton. And hopefully that inspires folks as we go into the next part of our session. We are going to be going into our breakout group discussions for about 35 minutes with the whole group. So before we actually get into our rooms, I'm going to go through just some of our discussion guidelines to help the flow of conversation, and also just to make sure that we are having respectful conversations and discussion. And we want to make sure that we are able to hear from all of you during this call as well. So we encourage you to be fully present. I know this can be a little bit hard in a virtual setting, lots of distractions or other things going on online. So we encourage you to be present, if that means turning on your camera during the breakouts, being able to listen as well as speak. We also encourage you to use the raise hand feature in Zoom and to follow the 1 mic rule, so 1 person speaking at a time. You will have a facilitator and a note taker in your room. The facilitator will help make sure that the flow of conversation is there. So if you go into the reactions button, there is a place where you can raise your hand. We also ask that you use I statements and speak from personal experience. Move up, move back. So if you're someone who tends to talk a lot, trying to move back and listen. If you're someone who's quieter, trying to move up and speak more, we want to hear from everyone. And then also a note on sort of confidentiality of this space. So outside of this discussion, feel free to share the lesson, but not the story. So don't name names We will be taking notes, but we won't be recording, and any of the notes and sort of lessons from the conversation will not be attributed to specific people. And then we also just ask that you be curious about others' ideas and opinions. We have a diversity of folks in our Zoom rooms, so being able to spend time listening to each other. And you'll go through these questions one by one in your discussion, but wanted to just frame them up right now. First off, we are interested in learning from you and thinking about agriculture and natural lands. What is most important to you and why? What has driven you to attend this session today, and what are you thinking about? We'd also love to hear what examples of successful programs or policies related to this sector you've seen either in your own community or other places around the region or the country. And then shifting a little bit to think about what is the role of local government or regional collaboration in scaling up solutions in this sector. So we heard some great examples from Andrea and some of the other community spotlights. How can we start to scale solutions? And then also, last but not least, not all communities are impacted the same way. How can we ensure that strategies and measures within agriculture and natural lands are equitable and provide benefits to low income and communities of color? So now I'm going to ask Emma to open up the Zoom rooms, and I will stay in the main room in case anyone has any challenges moving into your room. And hope you all have a great discussion.
A chance to think about strategies that aren't just municipality by municipality, but that cross-connect across municipalities, and watershed organizations were brought up as one entity to include, as well as conservation districts as well, and connecting to federal opportunities like the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. We also talked about examples from other jurisdictions, with King County in Washington being brought up as a good one to look to, and particularly connecting rural to urban via food systems and waste systems was a theme in our group. And then we also talked about trying to understand who has access to green and open space, and how mapping tools can help us as a first step. And then from there, how it's important to build trust and do engagement, one-on-one community engagement, door-to-door engagement, to really understand the needs of people in different communities. And there was a great example brought up of work that one person in our group has done in Chinatown, and which is close to the Boston Common, but that's not where people go for open space. There's a need there for pocket parks and other more local gathering spaces, and that's information you really only get via language access and building trust and talking to community members. That was just a snippet of what we got. Radoshi, if you want to add anything else, or anybody else.
No, I think you captured that really in a really great way. But I think the recurring theme, underlying theme, or not that underlying, that came around in our conversations is really elevating the relationships that we have with each other and the environment around us. I think that's what came up as one of the most important things, being respectful of that, but really using that as a nucleus to build measures around. So I think that's going to be something that we'll also be looking to elevate when we work on this further.
Great, thank you. Emma and Samiksha.
I can get us started. Our breakout room also had a very robust discussion. Some of the themes that emerged with the first question about what's important was definitely retaining natural lands and its maintenance and restoring it. So both retaining it right now, but also the land that's been lost and restoring it. We also talked about controlling invasives and municipal acquisition of conservation land. I'm going through my notes. And municipal bodies using federal funds to do so. And there's a definitely emphasis on education and outreach and trying to communicate to the people to municipal structures, and creating opportunities for community to volunteer and have these issues brought to them through that channel. And about thinking about equity, definitely emphasis on intention and putting in the effort to build trust and restore the relationships that might have been traditionally broken due to exclusion of marginalized people. So there are very good examples of collaboration among volunteer groups, students, and municipal governments as well. Am I missing anything from Angela or anybody else?
No, that was a great summary. Thanks.
Thank you. Last but not least, Allie and Grace.
Thanks. I don't think I can do our full conversation justice. Just appreciate everyone that was in our breakout room for so many great thoughts. I will highlight a few of the themes we talked about. So one was just that when we think about preservation and land use, there's like really need to focus on how other types of land uses like buildings, transportation, other intersect with and impact the agriculture and forestry and natural lands. And also just want to highlight that there was a discussion about how there really isn't a distinction between forest and agriculture. So really thinking about those together. We talked about how there's just a big need for more education engagement. That's one of the biggest barriers standing in the way. So needing to do engagement early on, needing before, it's too late in the processes, needing a way to really like communicate the values and benefits of land use and forest preservation. And then I think connected to that is that both in the actual physical projects that are done and also in the many plans that are created at municipal levels, there's just a big patchwork. And so really feeling a need to kind of consolidate or align plans and processes where we can. And then finally, we talked about how the resources to actually access grants create inequities and how there are so many there are at least a lot of funds and grant programs available, but not every farm or every municipality has grant writers to access those. And then similarly, just a need for when there are those programs to fund them more and ensure that there's sustained funding so farmers and communities can have a reliable source into the future. And Grace, anything you want to add?
No, I think that was very well said. I agree.
Great. Thanks for the report backs, and it even across the three groups, even though there was a lot of diversity in experiences and sort of where people are coming from and what they're working on, sounds like some key themes around need for education and outreach, as well as funding and resources, and good discussion around role of municipal local government versus how state and federal opportunities can be used. So again, want to just echo the appreciation for your time in sharing this. We will be, as you know, we have note takers in each of the rooms, so we'll be compiling all of those notes, and as follow-up, we'll be sharing some of those thoughts. But before we close out, I'm going to share my screen again and turn it back to Allie to talk a little bit about some of just like the overall next steps on the climate action plan. And for some reason, it just skipped slides. Okay, Allie, there you go.
Thanks, Sasha. So as we were talking about earlier, this planning process is going all the way through December 2025, and we would love to continue engaging with you all and for you to spread the word about this with your network. So we will be having an engagement roadshow in the winter, and that will be with regional planning agencies and municipalities and community-based organizations throughout the region. So please keep an eye out for that, and would love for you to join those meetings. And along with that, we'll also have a survey to generate more ideas for measures and prioritize what will actually make it into the plan. And so a great way to stay in the loop about all of that that's coming up is to join our listserv so that you can stay up to date, and we'll send the link out to join that following the meeting. And then just so you know, we do have a Greater Boston CAP website where we have slides, recordings, and other information about our past, future events, as well as that priority plan that I talked through earlier. And we would love to continue hearing from you. I know we did not have enough time in our breakout rooms to really get into discussion, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us at cprg@mapc.org if you have other questions or want to chat more or other ideas that you'd love to for us to consider for the plan. So thank you in advance for sharing all of your wonderful thoughts with us. And just want to make a plug while we're here that MAPC, we have a technical assistance program, which is a funding program that enables cities and towns to access MAPC's staff expertise and resources to move forward local and regional goals. And so we are looking for proposals currently now through December of this year. So if you're interested, there's the website here, but you can also shoot us an email at that email address, and we'd love to chat more if you have any ideas. And so with that, we will wrap up this workshop. Thank you again so much for attending and bringing all of your expertise and experience. It was great to meet you and hear from all of you, and we hope to continue to stay in touch in the future throughout this planning process.
Yeah, thank you all.
Bye, thank you.